everyone, welcome to Book Talk with Shweta Rohira. And on our today's episode, we have the author of What's Left of the Jungle, a conservation story by Nitin Sekar. And we're going to talk to him all about this story and a lot more. Also, before I invite him on the book talk, let me tell you my secret bookshelf is a virtual book club. And to know more about it, you need to log on to mysecretbookshelf.co.in and know a lot about bookshelf too. So let's invite Nitin and get started with the book talk. Let me see if he's here. Also, in the meantime, while I send him a request, tell me, have you all read this book? Book that you really like. Well, I was amazed to know so much about this story because we live in a part where we know a little about the animals and very little about the jungles. So while I was reading this story, I was amazed to know so much more. And I must say, the facts and figures that have been mentioned in this book makes you want to be there. Also, the way it's written, you are partially transported with the author and the co-author automatically in the jungles and know all about them, about the animals, about everything. Also, how the traps are laid, the camera traps to click the pictures and everything. There's just so much more in this book. I would love to talk about it, but I would rather prefer you all to go and get your copies and enjoy the book more, because while I was reading, there was so much more that I wanted to share with you all. So when you all get your copies of What's Left of the Jungle, also do let us know what you loved about the book. I'm also going to put up very soon what I have loved about the book. And I did send an invite to Bloomsbury, India, but they were unable to join. So I'm going to send a request again, and hopefully we shall get started with our book talk with Nitin Sekar. So I am sending a request again. Hi Antara, hey Namrata Dhawan, romance novelist, author 123. Hello. So everyone, what are you all reading nowadays? What is the current book that you all are reading, and what is the next book you all are going to read? Well, I have just finished reading this one, and now I'm going to read a book of poems, and then there is a compilation of short stories that I'm going to read. That is my two reads for now, which I'm going to read after this. And romance novelist, hello, B-Tales for Teens, the big bull of crypto, Bloomsbury, India has joined in, and I'm again sending them a request. Hopefully this time we shall get started with our book talk with Nitin. There's so much that I want to talk to him, especially after reading the book, and I'm sure there's a lot that you all also want to talk to him. So keep sending in the questions, and as many questions that we can cover, we shall cover. I have sent him a request, and I've also accepted the request that he has sent. Oops. And again, there is an Insta glitch. It says they are unable to join. Let's see, another one. So let's keep fingers crossed. Let's just hope this gets started super soon. That's the best thing about Insta. Hi, Nitin.
Hi, Shweta. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. Sorry, just learning how to use Instagram.
Your camera in a way so that we can see you, and there we can see
Yes,
you.
yes. There you go. Great.
So thank you firstly to write this book, because I was amazed to know so many facts, because it's like a parallel world that is living out there, and we are totally unaware. We see a little bit of it on the National Geographic and all, but it's totally like an alien world, and there's just so much out there. So firstly, thank you for writing this story and telling us about these facts. There's so much more that I want to know now through you.
Thanks for taking the time to read it. I really appreciate it.
So Nitin, would you like to tell our viewers a little about this book, What's Left of the Jungle, especially for the ones who want to go and buy? So just tell them a little about this book, please.
Sure. So basically, What's Left in the Jungle is my effort to try and understand a miracle that's happened in India. So even though India has nearly 1.4 billion people, we still have the world's largest population of wild Asian elephants in the world. And this is just, like I said, it's a miracle. If you go to densely populated societies like Japan or Europe or North America, they've even killed off like their wolves, let alone living with an animal as sort of big and potentially dangerous as an elephant. And so when I was starting my PhD, as a as a 24-year-old, I actually ended up in North Bengal, living in a community that was in Buxa Tigers. There were lots of elephants would come in and raid crops, and sometimes even break kitchens and try and get food from the people. And I realized that the story of the people there helped, and how they saw elephants and how they lived alongside wildlife helped explain how it was that India still has this much wildlife, despite the big population and all the other, all the challenges we face in the society. So I decided to tell the story through one person in particular, my field assistant Akshu Attari, his life story, and try to kind of address that mystery.
So how long did this journey take to write this book?
Yeah, a long time. So I basically I started initially writing it in 2013, just as I finished my work in Buxa. And initially, actually, I was just writing it from my perspective. So the book sort of follows sort of the perspective of an outsider, myself, and as well as Akshu's perspective as an insider. And so basically, only after about a year in, I was like, you know what? I should really do this with Akshu. And he agreed. He was a big fan of that. And so in 2015, we spent a month together in Buxa, and I just interviewed him and all, his relatives, his friends, other people in the area, about their experience living in Buxa. And then over weekends and holidays, I worked on the book for the next 5 years. And yeah, I published this year. So 9 years, I guess, 8 years. Yeah.
So these 8 years you've compiled in this book, and you must have relived all those moments while you were writing it, and you must have transported yourself there. So how was it going through the emotional journey again and reliving those moments?
Well, I think actually one of the biggest things I've benefited from through this process is, I was only like, 25, 26, 27 when I was there, right? So, things didn't go as planned, right? And that's the book kind of really follows. When you're an outsider, you think the jungle works a certain way, you think local communities work a certain way, and as you kind of wrestle with issues, you realize that the world is much more complicated than one would think. And I actually a lot of people would say they do one thing and then do another or whatever, or I'd be like, oh my gosh, all this poaching and smuggling is happening from the forest. Why isn't the forest department doing something about it? And I get really upset. And for me, having the opportunity to kind of write these stories down and think about it made me more philosophical about it. I'm like, oh, everyone who's working for the forest department, they have very complicated lives too. And the people living in these communities, they have to struggle with the poverty that I've never had. I'm very privileged. I haven't had to deal with that. And so it actually helped me sort of see the whole thing with more maturity than I think I would have if I had just been if I hadn't really processed it. So I benefited that way from the book.
That one moment where you actually opened your laptop and you started typing the book, which was that one trigger moment in your life?
Well, so this isn't very flattering to myself, honestly, but the reason, I don't know. I think probably a lot of people in my field in conservation, we want to have adventures, right? We want to go out and experience what it's like to be in a place with elephants or leopards or tigers or and that kind of thing. I'd go out there and then I'd come back home, and I grew up in the U.S., and so I'd go home to the U.S. And no one really wanted to hear what I had to talk about. Everyone, that's nice. You have nice pictures, it's fine. But and also they just hadn't had that shared experience, so I couldn't really kind of explain to them in the 20 seconds that people would listen, why I thought that these experiences meant something, right? Why, the fact that the jungle didn't work the way I thought it did was significant. And so I just started writing these stories down, so I at least could remember for myself and process for myself what was going on. So it started out as a much more sort of personal therapy thing until I realized, oh, there's actually a bigger story here about how how these dynamics explain the miracle of how Asian elephants and other species have survived in this country of 1.4 billion people. So yeah, sorry, not super exciting, but the truth.
It is. In fact, like you just said, we know about the jungle. It's more like at a very superficial level. And when you read this book, it just amazes you that, how the jungle works, how the people out there work, how a simple thing, like, in the beginning of the story, like where suddenly the jungle turns into a reserve and how the families get affected. I'm sure none of us actually out here think about any of these things. For us, it's like, okay, the government passed the law and it's done. But we really don't realize the effects that the humans are also facing, the animals are also facing. So I am like speechless after this book. There's so much that went through within me while I was reading this book. There was so much knowledge imparted through this book that it was just amazing.
I'm really glad you felt that way. But here's the interesting thing, Shweta. You're not actually you're not trained in conservation, right? I was trained in conservation. I also didn't know this stuff, right? I didn't, you just kind of, like you said, you sort of assume that things have a certain process. That, okay, if you're living in tiger reserve and the place has becomes a tiger reserve, then maybe you will be notified. And even sort of the law requires that if people are living in tiger reserve, that the rights will be, will sort of be sort of acknowledged or settled in some way. So then, if it's not like one day you're grazing your cows in the forest outside your village, the next day is a tiger reserve and you're no longer allowed to do it. It's not supposed to be that way. But you're right that in practice, these restrictions come into people's lives without them really having a chance to sort of negotiate or discuss or come up with a reasonable way to be compensated for the losses that they're experiencing. And that's why I think telling the story from Akshu and his family's story perspective was so important. Because they had that lived experience. They experienced, what it's like to be sort of the subject to these changing policies and the whimsical decisions of elites, and then to both suffer or sometimes enjoy the consequences.
So Nitin, here there is this book which has a lot of facts, and there were a lot of facts that you had to add or maybe change the name for the purpose for the book, so a little had to be fictionalized. So what was the process like? How difficult was it? How easy was it to have facts versus fiction?
So as far as I know, everything in there is factual, except, like you said, some of the characters, some people do things in the book that aren't very, that aren't very good. It's not very flattering to them. And we didn't, Akshu and I work closely on this book together, and we don't want to call anyone out. So we changed the names, and we also created compilation characters, right? So, for instance, maybe when I have one forest guard character, actually he's a combination of 2 or 3 different forest guard characters, that sort of thing. And that way we're trying to protect people through that. But otherwise, as far as we, to the best of our ability, we've tried to make this this is nonfiction. But yeah, I think again, I think one of the big issues with conservation is, those of us who come to conservation, we are trained as biologists and ecologists, right? We love animals, and so then we get a degree in biology or ecology or something like that, and then we come and engage with these issues. But actually, conservation, it's a sociological issue. It's a political problem, right? It's like, how do you settle people's rights in a fair way? How do you make sure that folks if they have certain cultural practices that may or may not be great for conserving species, how do you make sure that they get to honor their culture while also achieving conservation objectives? And we're not trained in any of that, right? Like, a really good conservation program should involve learning local languages. It should involve understanding local politics and history and local sociology. And so since it doesn't involve that, when I was trying to write this book, I was learning all these facts about this place after I'd done my work there, right? I finished my fieldwork there in 2013 and I left. And only after that, I'm learning about some of the history, both from local people and then by reading some of the political science literature and other things like that. So to me, and that's one of the reasons I thought this book could be useful and important, because for people who want to be out there helping, wildlife thrive, but also want to make sure that local people get, fair opportunities. I was hoping this book would be sort of a lighthearted way to understand how complex these issues are and what kind of things they could learn about the area where they want to work, to be effective conservationists. But I wanted to be a fun, interesting story. And Akshu's life, I mean, you must agree, right? Akshu's life story is just
He's a character
incredible.
himself.
Yeah. And so that was just a great vehicle to help, to make that medicine go down easy.
So, like you said, this book is for everyone, a conservationist as well as a layman. That's why it's lighthearted. It's like for both the people, the ones who've studied, the ones who are alien about this particular subject. It's for all out there. When you started getting the reviews, you got some from the conservationists as well as you must have got from the lay people. So, tell us something about them.
Well, so far, knock on wood, the reviews have been positive. I think that I spent 6 years on my PhD. At the end of writing that PhD, I bet you maybe five, six people read the whole thing, and that's it, right? And so one of the reasons I wrote the book is like, I want to make sure that some of these ideas actually get out to people. I want to make sure that that's the way you improve discourse on an issue as complicated as conservation. And so that's the reason the book is written for an audience that that's interested in these issues but may not have any technical background. And so far, it seems that it's achieving that objective of helping people who don't have that technical background understand how complex these issues are and how interesting they are and how awesome they are, and also why we should care not just about elephants or just about local people, but why we should care about both these groups. They're both sort of they're sort of victims of modernization and technological progress, and we should find a way to serve both local people and wildlife.
So you faced a lot of challenges while you were out there, which we read in the story. What was the most challenging thing for you when you were writing the book?
The most challenging thing when I was writing the book, well, so I think that there's just you don't want to get things wrong, right? It's a nonfiction book, and so it's important to, especially when you're writing about someone else's life, right? Like to make sure that the details are as correct as they can be, that I'm not doing disservice to anyone. And so I would, I live in Coimbatore, India. I've been living in India for the last 4 years, but before that, for a few years, I was based in the US. And so I would call Akshu on, he had a phone by that time, and sometimes we'd be up until, late his night or late my night, just kind of getting some details right and making sure that the story was as accurate as possible. And also, just generally, these areas, there's not as much documentation as you would like, right? And I think that finding information and making sure that we didn't get anything wrong, that was to me the thing that sort of worried me a bit. But yeah, again, I think we did as well as possible. So,
what did you discover in yourself as a writer while you were writing it?
Well, I'm probably not as good a writer as I'd want to be. So yeah, I use a lot of words. I mean, I guess probably I speak in the same way. I'm quite loquacious. And so I think I might have written 3 to 4 times the volume of pages that were ultimately published. And so that had to be cut down and shaved off and reimagined. And yeah, my wife happens to be in children's literature, and so she only entered my life halfway through this process, and I'm very lucky that she did because she took a first cut at that stuff. And yeah, then obviously editors also helped a lot. But yeah, and I think it's a team sport. Even any of these things, right? If in some ways doing a PhD, only one person's name shows up on it, but actually you can see, right, that in the book the local people. I think I work with. Uh, as assistants, and without them, the PhD wouldn't have happened. And similarly, with the book, all these people provide input or ideas in some way or the other, and that's why the product comes out reasonably well.
What criticism did you face when the book was out? Was there any criticism in the process while getting it published, or any criticism that you faced when the book was out from somebody?
So far, again, knock on wood. So far, there hasn't been criticism that I can really sort of think of.
Gotcha.
But again, I think it's a matter of time. It's a longer book, so it'll take time for more people to read it. and at some point, I'm sure there will be concerns. I think that one thing I already found that I made like one error, which is that I misspelled one of the Nepali words in the book. That's as far as I've gotten. But and hopefully it stays at that level. But yeah, we'll see.
What would you like to tell our viewers? Why should they purchase What's Left in the Jungle?
Well, so I'd say there's two broad reasons. One is if you're really interested in going into conservation, I think this story is meant to help people understand just how complicated, but also how interesting this stuff is. I've like luckily I have a couple of colleagues who also worked in North Bengal on elephant and other species conservation, and they've agreed that the book captures the spirit of conservation and the struggles that both local people and that we as conservationists go through. So that's one. But the other thing that just more broadly, like I said, Akshu's life story is so interesting. It's so fascinating, right? And it's just those of us who don't grow up in the jungle, you just can't imagine what it's like to be herding cattle and then suddenly an elephant joins the herd. Or it's really hard to understand what it's like to be pressured to try and to be a poacher or a smuggler, even if you really don't want to do that stuff. To see all these changes in the jungle, species disappearing or elephants becoming more sort of confident as they come and try and raid your crops and break into your house. Like until you sort of read that story, you can't really understand what that stuff's like. And so even if you're not yet interested in conservation, I think this book hopefully will make you realize just how fascinating the lives of both wildlife and people in those areas are.
So people, I have read the book and I would really vouch for it. So if you haven't got your copies, do get the copy of What's Left of the Jungle, and do let Nitin know, do let Bloomsbury, do let My Secret Bookshelf know what did you love about the book. And Nitin, now before I get on the last segment of Book Talk, do you have your copy around so that we can have a selfie moment with the book?
Oh, sure, I do. Yeah. Yeah, it's right here.
Okay, that's our selfie moment. And now I'm getting on to the last segment of Book Talk. So I'm going to ask you some questions, it's more like a rapid fire. And the first thing that comes to your mind, answer in one word or a sentence. So are you ready?
Okay. As ready as I'll ever be, sure.
Oh, perfect. So the current book that you're reading.
I am reading a book called In Service of the Republic, which is basically about by two economist bureaucrats and how they think we should design policy to help deal with poverty issues.
The last book that you read.
The last book that I read is a book called Fuzz, which is about human wildlife conflict around the world. I'm also in the middle of a book, a series called Buddha. It's by Osamu Tezuki. It's basically it's a manga version of the Buddha's life, which I find it's older. It's about 30, 40 years old, but it's a really interesting take.
The next book that you plan to read.
The next book that I plan to read. What do I have? I recently got, I guess, The Nutmeg's Curse, that was called, by Amitav Ghosh, so I might read that one. And I also got an old R.K. Narayan book recently, and so I'll read one of those, depending on whether I need something light or need something heavy next go around.
A book on a conservation story, just something similar to yours. If you had to suggest, which one would it be?
A book on a conservation story similar to mine. In the Shadow of Man by Jane Goodall is an old one. It's a classic. So not to promote my book again when I shouldn't, but one of the reasons I wrote it is because I don't know of any other books that really kind of speak from the perspective of local people. But obviously Jane Goodall's story is just amazing, with chimpanzees and.
If you had to write a book on one animal, which one would it be?
You know what? I would probably write about the house crow. I bet you the crow is. I think we probably all underappreciate it, and you can get data easily just by hanging out outside.
Toughest job as a writer?
Realizing that you need to start over, either a chapter or maybe even rewriting most of the book, even years into the project.
If the title was not What's Left of the Jungle, what would it be?
So, just between you and me, I was pitching for another title. So, first of all, I wanted to be called The What's Left of the Jungle book, like kind of a play on words. That's too cutesy, I think, for my publisher. But the other suggestion I had was Jungle Dwellers, because
Oh.
it's kind of about both people and wildlife that dwell in the jungle. But you know, I yield to the wisdom of my publishers. They know what much better what works.
So we hope that we get another book from you, which is The Jungle Dwellers, because I'm sure there's so much more stories that are going to be there, and we would like to know so much more about the jungle. So I think that's a good title that you should keep for your next book.
Thanks, Shweta. I mean, for people like you actually read a lot of books and put so much into it. It means a lot when people like you think there's something worthwhile here. I really appreciate it.
And now the first word that comes to your mind when I say these things. What's left of the jungle?
Akshu is the first mind that came to mind. First word that came to mind. Honestly, yeah.
Okay, my next thing was Akshu.
Oh, um, inspiration,
Jungle.
complicated,
Elephants.
soulful,
Leopard.
spots,
Madhuban Gaon.
transformation,
Buksa.
still beautiful. That's 2 words. Sorry.
Okay, allowed. Bloomsbury.
Godsend.
And lastly, how was it being on Book Talk with Shweta Rohira on My Secret Bookshelf?
Wonderful. Big fan of what y'all are doing.
Thank you, Nitin, for your time, for this amazing book, for sharing this amazing insights of the jungle with us. And thank you for your time today on Book Talk with Shweta Rohira. The entire team of My Secret Bookshelf really thanks you for your time and for all of this.
Thanks, Shweta. I mean, you know, if you're an author, all you want is people to read your book. So thank you so much for doing so and for trying to help others find it too.
Wish you a happy weekend, and viewers. After our book talk is over, do get your copies and do message Nitin and tell him what you loved about the book, what you loved about Akshu, what you loved about the jungle. We are all yours for you. So go get your copy of What's Left of the Jungle soon and let us know. Happy weekend, Nitin, and see you soon.
Thanks, you too.